A poor beekeeper's daughter fed a lost rider one supper. He owned the stage line. The jar was sitting on the table when I walked in. Not a big jar. One of those amber ones you get at a general store, narrow at the neck, wide at the base, with a cloth lid tied down with twine. The lamplight went through it and threw a gold shadow on the wood planks, and I don't know why I noticed it first, before I noticed her, before I noticed anything else in that room, but I did. I stood there in the doorway with mud on my boots and rain starting to come sideways off the hills, and I just looked at that jar. Honey. I hadn't had honey since before my wife passed. We kept it in the same kind of jar. You going to stand there all night letting the cold in? She was over near the stove, stirring something. She didn't look up when she said it. The voice was even, not sharp, just the tone of a woman who didn't have time to waste on dramatics. I stepped in and pulled the door behind me. The latch was one of those drop-bar kinds, a piece of iron that settled into its slot with a low clunk that you felt more than heard, and the noise of the wind cut off like someone had put a hand over a mouth. Sorry, I said. I saw the light. That's what it's for. She finally turned. Not young, 30, maybe a year either side of it. Brown hair pinned up at the back with what looked like a single wooden pin, the kind you carve yourself. A face that'd been outdoors most of its life. Not pretty the way a man means pretty when he says it easy, but the kind of face that, once you'd looked at it properly, you didn't want to look somewhere else. She looked me over, the way a person looks at a horse to see if it's fit to work, not unkind, just level. You lost, she said. My horse threw a shoe about 4 miles back. I walked her in. She's under your lean-to. I know, I've heard her. She turned back to the stove. Sit down if you're going to. I sat. The table was plain planed pine, still showing the marks of the saw on its underside where someone had started smoothing it and then decided that was close enough. 3 chairs, a lantern on a wall hook, the jar of honey. A tin cup near the window with a dried stem of something in it. I couldn't tell what, some wildflower long past its season. The room smelled like wood ash and beeswax, and whatever she was cooking, and underneath all of it something sweeter and older, the kind of sweet you breathe in before you taste it. Where are you riding from? She said. That's a longer answer than most people want, I thought. West, I said. She made a sound that meant she'd heard me and wasn't going to push it. Stirred once more, then moved the pot to the side of the stove where it'd hold. Supper's bean and salt pork, she said, and bread from this morning, it's dry. That's more than fine. She looked at me again. You say that like a man who means it. I do mean it. She got 2 bowls down from the shelf. Didn't ask, just got 2 like it was already settled. My name is Caleb Dross. I own the Dross & Sons stage line, though there are no sons, which is a thing that stopped bothering me about 8 years ago and started again some mornings. 11 stations from Laramie to Bozeman, 400 and some odd miles of road, 9 coaches, 64 horses, and more men on the payroll than I can remember on the days when I'm tired. I built it from a single used Concord I bought at a sheriff's auction in '71 for less than the wheels were worth, and I have not had a full week of sleep since. None of which I told her. Not that night, not the next morning, not for a good while. I don't know exactly when I decided not to. It wasn't a plan. I've come to understand that the best things rarely are. It was more that she asked me plain questions. Where was I riding from? Where was I going? How long had I been on the road? And I answered plain. And it turned out that my plain answers had nothing to do with stage lines or station tallies or what a man owns. It was November. I'd been riding a route I hadn't seen in 12 years, out to check on a stretch of road we were talking about adding to the line, a new spur east toward Billings. My segundo, old Rafe, had offered to send a man to scout it. I told him I'd go myself. He gave me the look he always gives me, which is the look of a man who knows when to stop arguing, and I rode out the next morning. The truth is I needed to be on a horse. Just on a horse alone, in country that didn't know my name. That is what I told her. Not in those words. But when she asked why I was out riding in November with a storm coming in, I said I needed to see some country, and she nodded like that was an answer a person could respect. My father did the same thing, she said. When the hives needed looking at, he'd ride out to the far ridge, even if there was nothing to look at. He said the bees knew if you were thinking too loud. I almost smiled. Maybe they do. They know other things too. She broke the bread into pieces, not sliced, broken, the way you do when there's no point pretending it's fresh enough to slice clean. They know if you're sick before you know it yourself. If you walk near a hive when you're carrying something bad in you, they'll come out. Does that mean I'm all right? Nothing came out at me when I came through the yard. You walked wide around them. I didn't even see them in the dark. She looked at me with something that might have been the start of a smile. It didn't arrive all the way. No, you didn't. Her name was Vera Palk. Her father had run the bees here until 2 years ago, when something went into one lung and then the other, and then that was the end of him. Her mother had been gone longer than that, since Vera was 11, a fever winter. She had a brother somewhere in Colorado, but he'd gone to the mines, and she hadn't heard from him in going on 3 years. She told me this slowly, over the span of the evening, the way you tell things to a stranger you're not sure of yet. A piece here, a piece there. Not because you're hiding anything, but because you're finding out as you go whether the person across the table is worth the whole story. She ran the bees herself now. 31 hives up from 22 when her father died. She'd built 9 more herself, winter evenings, learning the joinery by taking one of his apart and putting it back. She sold honey in town, to the general store and to 2 families who bought direct. She had a small truck garden for food, a milk cow, 4 chickens. She got by. That was the phrase she used. Got by. Not comfortably or easily or any other word that softened it. I asked once if she'd thought about leaving. She looked at me like I'd asked something she didn't fully understand. The hives are here, she said. My father built those hives. The bees know this land. I didn't say anything to that. But I thought about it for a long time afterward, about what it means to be that tied to a piece of ground. I'd spent 20 years building something that moved, coaches on roads, horses changing at stations, men going from one place to the next. And here was a woman whose whole world was rooted in 31 wooden boxes on a hill, and the idea of pulling up from it made as much sense to her as asking the hill to move. I respected it. More than respected it. There was something in it I recognized, though I couldn't have named it then. The same stubbornness, maybe. The same refusal to let a thing you built go to rot just because it got hard. She gave me her father's room for the night. The cot was narrow and the blanket smelled of cedar, and she'd put a candle on the small table by the window. Before she left, she said, "Your horse's shoe, I'll look at it in the morning." My father had tools. You shoe horses. I can tack a loose shoe, depends on what threw it. I lay in the dark and listened to the rain come in against the glass. The wind had picked up. Not a bad storm, just a November storm, the kind that doesn't apologize and doesn't last. I hadn't slept in a bed in 9 days. The cot was hard and I was asleep before I'd finished thinking about it. In the morning she was already outside. I found her in the lean-to with my mare, one hand flat on the horse's neck, talking to her in a low voice. Not baby talk, more the way a person talks to someone they're asking for patience from. She had my mare's left foreleg up between her knees and was looking at the hoof, turning it slightly in the early light. She heard me come in, but she didn't look up. "Stone bruise under the frog," she said, "and the shoes sprung at the heel. She's been favoring it." "I know. You rode her 4 miles on it." "I walked her." "Still." She set the hoof down, stroked the mare's nose once, and then stood and looked at me straight. "I can tack the shoe back, but you shouldn't push her for 2, 3 days. The bruise needs to quiet down." I looked at her. The morning light was coming in at an angle through the lean-to's open front, and it caught the side of her face, the line of her jaw, the place where a strand of hair had come loose from the pin in the night. "All right," I said. She hadn't asked me to stay, she had just told me the plain fact. 2, 3 days, it was my choice what to do with it. I chose to stay. I told myself it was for the horse. She didn't change anything about her routine for me. She was up before first light every morning, checking the hives, walking the row of them on the hill above the cabin with a slow, deliberate step, pausing here and there to listen, actually listen, ear tilted toward the wood. She said you could hear when something was wrong. A hive that was right had a sound, and when it changed you'd know. I asked her to show me. She looked at me with those level eyes. Then she said, "All right," and handed me the veil. I stood at the edge of the first hive with the smoke box while she worked the lid. The sound came up at me, and I understood immediately why she said you'd know. It was a low, continuous vibration, almost felt rather than heard, like the hum of a telegraph wire in wind, but living. She ran a bare hand along the top frame, and the bees moved around her fingers and didn't raise. "You're not afraid of them," I said. "They know me. What do they think of me?" She glanced over. "You're calm, that helps. They feel what you're carrying." I thought about that. What am I carrying? She looked back at the frame. "Something old, something you've been a long time setting down." I didn't answer that, but she wasn't wrong and we both knew it. I did what I could around the place while I was there. I'm not a man who sits. I never have been. Even when I was at my desk in Laramie going through manifests and payroll tallies, some part of me was always half standing, ready to be somewhere else. So I split wood, because there was always wood to split. I fixed the hinge on the door to the root cellar, which had been working loose for so long that the wood around the bolt was sheened from where her hand had been going in at the same angle trying to compensate for the sag. I cleared the drainage ditch along the north side of the cabin, which was heaped with the year's fallen leaves, and was going to turn the yard to mud before the first hard snow if nobody got to it. She didn't thank me exactly. She'd come by in the afternoon, look at what I'd done, and say something like, "That'll hold better now," or "Father kept meaning to do that," which I understood to mean it mattered. The second evening she made something better than beans. She'd killed one of the chickens, she didn't announce it. It was just on the table when I came in, and there were roasted potatoes with it, and the bread was from that day, not yesterday, and she'd put the honey jar on the table with a spoon alongside it. I looked at the spread, and something moved in my chest that I didn't have a name for. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "I know it," she sat down. "I wanted to." That was the whole conversation. We ate. The fire went down some, and she added a piece of wood. We talked about her hives, about the winter coming, about the cold spring, and how it had affected the honey yield. I told her about roads, about what makes a road good and what makes it dangerous, about how a road that looks fine in summer turns to soup in March and what you do about it. She listened the way she did everything, quietly, with attention, without interrupting. After a while I realized I'd been talking for 20 minutes straight and hadn't meant to. "Sorry," I said. "Don't be." She looked at me across the table. "You know a great deal about roads. I've spent enough time on them. More than most people." "More than most." I turned the honey spoon over in my hand. There's something I haven't told you." She waited. I thought about how to put it. I've had it said about me that I'm good in a boardroom, that I can put a case together plain and leave a man without a reasonable objection. I could not find plain words for it right then. I kept starting inside my head and starting again. "I'm not just a writer," I said. "I own the stage line, the dross line, Laramie to Bozeman. I was out surveying a new spur. That's what I was doing when the horse threw the shoe." She looked at me for a long moment. I waited for something to change in her face. For the calculation to start, most people, when they find out what a man has, the first thing that crosses their face is calculation. What does this mean for me? What's the angle? I've been sitting across tables from it my whole life, and I can read it before they know they're doing it. It didn't come. What came instead was something thoughtful, like she was fitting a new piece of information into a picture she was still building, without committing yet to what it changed. "The Dross line," she said. "Yes. I know that name." She folded her hands on the table. "The coach comes through Harney twice a week. Dross coaches." "That's right. I've never taken it." "No reason you would have had to." She was quiet for a moment. "Is that why you didn't say before?" "Partly." "What's the other part?" I looked at the honey jar, at the lamplight going through it, the same as the first night, throwing that gold shadow on the wood. "Because I didn't want to be the stage line owner," I said. "For a few days. I just wanted to be a man with a horse and a long road and something he was working out." She held my eyes for a long time, long enough that I started to wonder if I'd misjudged the whole thing, if I'd done something wrong by not saying sooner. Then she said, "Well, the meals were the same either way." She wasn't pretending the money didn't exist. Let me be clear about that, because I've told this story before and been misunderstood. Vera Palk was not a woman who acted like the world was flat when she could plainly see it was round. She knew what it meant that I owned the line. She wasn't going to put on a show of not caring about things a person has a right to care about. What she was honest. The next morning, third day, she was working at the bench near the back wall, repairing a frame. She'd lay a broken one across the bench and splice it with a thin tongue of wood tapped in from behind, tacking it with small brads from a tin that hung on a nail, and she said without looking up from her work, "Are you married?" "Widowed." She kept working. "When?" "6 years ago, fever." A pause. She tapped a brad in. "I'm sorry. It was a long time." 6 years isn't that long." She said it without sentiment, just as a matter of fact, and I thought, she's right. 6 years isn't that long. People kept saying it was long and I kept nodding, and now some woman in a bee yard had said the plain truth of it and I didn't know what to do with the relief. "No," I said, "it's not." She didn't say anything else for a while, just worked. The sound of the mallet, the thin tapping of the brads, the hives outside in the late morning quiet, their low hum coming in through the wall. "I've been asked twice," she said eventually, "to marry." "What happened?" "The first one I didn't love and I said so to his face." A small pause. "He didn't care for that. The second one moved to Oregon before it came to anything." I almost smiled again. This time it arrived. "You said so to his face," I said. "He deserved the truth. He was a decent man." "Most men would rather a kind lie." "I know." She looked up at me briefly with an expression I couldn't quite read, not unkind but watchful. "Is that what you'd want, a kind lie?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "I don't think I've ever had much use for them." She looked back down at her frame. "No," she said, as though she'd already considered this and made up her mind on it. "I don't suppose you have." I sent a wire from Harney on the 4th day. Rode in on the mare, who was moving easy now. The bruise quieted, and stopped at the telegraph office and wrote out a short message to Rafe. "Road survey delayed. Extend return by 1 week. Dross." Rafe's response came back in 40 minutes, which is fast, which means he was expecting it. "Understood, Billings can wait." I folded the paper and put it in my coat pocket, stood on the wooden sidewalk for a minute, feeling the cold coming off the mountains. The street was ordinary, the way all these small streets are ordinary: mud, horses at the rail, a dog that was mostly asleep. Nobody looked at me. I was just a rider in a worn coat. I had not felt this invisible in years. I had forgotten how good it could feel. I bought supplies on the way back. flour, salt, a tin of black tea, a paper sack of dried apples. I thought about bringing something else and stood in the store for a long time looking at the shelves before I decided on a small jar of good black pepper, the kind you grind yourself, because I'd noticed the pepper at her place was nearly gone, and she'd been going light with it at the table. It's a small thing, I know that. But the right small things are what tell a person where you've been paying attention. When I got back, she was in the yard mending a section of fence on the south side, hammering a new rail in where the old one had rotted through. She looked up when she heard the horse. I got down and handed her the things from the store one by one: flour, salt, tea, apples, the pepper last. She took it and looked at it. "I didn't ask you to do this," she said. "No. This is," she stopped, looked at the jar again. "This is more than a night's supper is worth." "I don't owe you for a supper," I said. "I just bought some things at the store." She looked up at me. The afternoon light was flat and gray, that winter-coming light that takes the color out of everything and makes the world look like it's gone still. She said quietly, "You're going to want something." It wasn't accusation. It was a statement, but with a question in it. A woman who'd been alone long enough to be careful about what things meant. "I want to keep coming back," I said, "if you'll allow it." The world held still. "To court me," she said. "Yes." She was quiet for a while, longer than I'd expected. She turned the pepper jar over in her hand once, then set it on the fence rail. "You have 11 stations and 60-some horses," she said. 64. "And you want to court a beekeeper." "I want to court you," I said, "which is not the same as a beekeeper." Something shifted in her face. Not dramatic, Vera didn't do dramatic, but something moved. "I have 31 hives," she said. "I'm not leaving them." "I haven't asked you to." "You will eventually. A man who owns a stage line lives somewhere. He has a house in a town." "I have a house in Laramie," I said, "and nothing particular keeping me in it. A road runs both ways." She picked the pepper jar back up and looked at it. Then she looked at me, the same level look she'd given me the first night in the doorway, the look that weighed a man without cruelty. "Once a month," she said. "You can ride out once a month, we'll see." "All right. And I want the truth, all of it, when there's something to tell." "You'll have it." "I mean that, Caleb." It was the first time she'd used my name. It landed in my chest somewhere around the third rib. "I know you do," I said. I rode back in December. In January, February, when the snow was bad enough that the Harney Road was impassable, and I came around by the ridge instead, a longer way, and didn't arrive until past dark and near frozen. She opened the door before I knocked, and she did not say a single word about the state I was in, just stood back and let me in and put a pot on the stove, and the look on her face as she handed me the cup, not soft, not fussing, just plain and direct and warm, was worth every mile of that ridge. Spring, I came more often. I told myself it was because the road was better. I came once a week in April and twice the first week of May, and she said, on the second day of that second visit, "You're losing count of the agreement." "I know," I said. She looked at me. The bees were going behind her, in and out of the near hives, the sound of them warm and constant in the morning air. "Are you going to ask me something?" she said. "I've been thinking about how." "You know all about roads," she said. "Just take the direct one." So I did. I told her I loved her. I didn't dress it up. I said I loved her, that she was the first person in a long time who'd seen me plain and without calculation, that I wasn't a man who found that often, that I didn't expect I'd find it again if I walked away from it now. She stood and listened to all of it. When I stopped, she said, "Are you done?" "Yes." "All right." She looked at her hands. They had propolis on them, the dark resin the bees used to seal the hive, staining her fingers brown at the tips. "I love you too. I've known it since February when you came over the ridge. Since February. You came over the ridge in a blizzard, she said, with that almost smile. For a woman with 31 beehives and dry bread, what was I supposed to think? We were married in June at the county seat, the smallest ceremony the justice of the peace had probably ever conducted. Rafe was there. One of her neighbors, a widow woman named Elsa who'd helped Vera with the bees in the bad winters, was there. Nobody made a speech. Afterward we ate at the hotel and rode back to the cabin, and that was that. I'm not going to tell you everything. A man keeps some things. What I'll tell you is that first night, married, in the cabin I had by then started fixing properly. The floor relayed, the roof patched, a new window frame on the north side. What I'll tell you is that she sat on the edge of the bed and let her hair down from that single wooden pin, and I watched it happen, and I thought, nobody in my life has ever seen me without knowing first what I was worth. The bank sees the line. The men on the payroll see the boss. The people in town see the name on the coaches. She saw me standing in the doorway in the rain, mud on my boots, horse 4 miles back, worth nothing in that moment but the man I was. And she put supper on. She didn't sell the hives. We didn't live in Laramie, not full-time. We built it out, a real house on the hill above the cabin, 2 rooms to start, with plans drawn for more. The cabin she kept for the bee work. I put in a good iron stove and a proper bench and a storage room for the honey jars. The stage line's eastern spur got built, the one I'd been scouting when the horse threw the shoe. It runs now, twice a week to Billings, and there's a station 8 miles from the cabin where the driver changes horses, and sometimes when I'm riding that road I'll pull off and look back at the hill and see the smoke coming from the cabin chimney, and the hives arranged in their row against the sky. I put a new section on the Harney Road that winter. Better drainage, better grading. She never asked me to. I did it because it was her road, the road that connected her to town and town to her, and because a man who can do a thing should do it for the woman he loves. The Harney station master put a new sign over the door, Dross and Sons, still no sons. But she's working on that argument, she tells me. I was 51 years old when I rode into that yard with mud on my boots and no one knowing my name. I've thought about it 1,000 times since. What would have happened if the shoe hadn't sprung? If it had been another mile, another road, another light in a window that I would have passed without stopping. But I stopped. And she put supper on. And the jar of honey sat on the table between us and threw its gold light on the plain pine wood. And the storm came in off the hills and didn't touch us. And I was, without knowing it, at the beginning of the best thing that would ever happen to me. That was 20 years ago. She still doesn't fuss, still talks to the bees in that low, matter-of-fact voice, still breaks the bread rather than slicing it, still has that look that weighs you without cruelty. I'm 71 now and she's 51, and the world has gone and changed around us. Stages giving way to rails, the old roads not what they were. But last spring she came in from the hives with propolis on her fingers, same as always, and set a jar of honey on the table, a fresh one, narrow at the neck, amber in the light, and she sat across from me and put her hand on top of mine where it rested on the wood. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I was home. That was always the thing. Not the road, not the line, not the 64 horses or the 11 stations or the name over the door. This table, this light, this woman's hand on mine. That,